Hey, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of the Captain's Table. I am your host, Captain B-Nard, and this is my brand new podcast series where we're going to discuss a variety of different issues in the entertainment industry, including movies, TV shows, and of course, video games. Today, our topic of discussion is going to be the current state of multiplayer gaming, and here to discuss that with me is Johnny Reps from Crash Love Gaming, a channel that I've worked with quite a lot in the past. What's up, Johnny?
A channel that's not been making an awful lot of content lately, but
Yes.
we'll probably make something eventually, I'm sure.
Sure, that sounds promising.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to pick this up, actually, kind of where we left off the last time we were on what would actually end up being the last episode of Crash Live's podcast, because Crash
Right.
loves Applebee's more than he loves podcasts or video gaming, apparently. But
Inside joke no one will understand from like 3 months ago.
yeah, yeah, that's a good, strong way to start this off. We were
Before
starting.
we start,
Sure.
are we available on iTunes? Are we YouTube exclusive? What's the deal?
We're YouTube exclusive here on my channel.
Right, and the sponsor today is CougarLife.com. Who
No.
are these cougars, you ask? I will tell you.
Uh,
Another inside joke.
Yeah, sure. There's going to be a lot of those. Okay, what we were talking about actually was the Star Wars Battlefronts 1 and 2. I think that's actually a good place to start this discussion because
Well,
I.
I think we could get to that a little bit later on. I actually have I kind of want to do an overview of the topic first, if that's okay.
Sure, go
So
for
the
it.
topic for today is we're talking about online multiplayer gaming and why it is bad nowadays. And I'll
Yeah.
get to the angry old man shouting at a cloud argument later. But to start out, I just want to talk about a lot of the primary reasons why I think multiplayer is bad nowadays, or at least what most modern day, especially mainstream first party and triple A level multiplayer games, why I think they're not that great. And the first thing I want to talk about is focus on the focus of the gaming, right?
Right.
What do you think is the focus of like multiplayer games nowadays? And what do you think? What would you say is like the big difference between this gen versus like PS3, PS2 gen and earlier?
Well, in my mind, it is back then those games were more focused on content, and these games just seem to be focused on like visuals versus content.
That's a big thing for sure. I think it kind of like boils down, if you kind of boil it down to or look at it the bigger picture. It's kind of more of like the older games had a lot of more focus on quality because it was all about getting noticed. It was all about establishing yourself. It was all about getting a
Right.
game that people want because multiplayer is kind of a new thing. But now it's all about it's the focus on a formula instead. Like every game follows a formula, and most games follow a very similar formula.
Yes, and that's a big grievance that I have with what's going on right now is that every game just seems kind of like a rehash of a previous game, and we're going to talk about something that I call Call of Duty syndrome, which is
I mean,
basically just
I think a lot of people call
releasing
it
the
that.
same game over and over again and calling it something else. So,
For sure.
um,
But like, okay, yearly that actually was the first point on my bullet list was yearly releases. So one of the biggest offenders, I don't know if you've bought any WWE 2K games lately, or have you?
not in the past 6 years, and there's a very good reason why, and that's
Right.
what I just said basically, because they're all the
So
same.
the yearly release thing is a big problem, how they kind of release but the thing about that is that's not an all too new problem because the yearly release thing has been going on for a long time. Like WWE have been making yearly games since what, like 1999, 2000, whenever the
Something like
SmackDown
that,
series
yeah.
started. But the problem is, it's gotten worse and worse lately. Like back then, there used to be, you used to have the GameCube games. There was like Raw for the Xbox, Day of Reckoning for the GameCube. There was SmackDown or SmackDown versus Raw for the PS2. Nowadays, you just have one main series, and almost every year, it's essentially the same game released with upgrades, and they change the roster. Like they'll get people, they'll take people out and add people, and it's kind of like they'll take out features and they'll add features. I mean,
It's
usually
just changing a few. It's just doing tweaks here and there.
it's
There's no real actual changes to the game that are significant.
yeah, and they might add in a new combat system here and there, but it's just that's the problem is like, and with a 1 year development cycle, we'll get more on the development cycles and cost of games nowadays later, but with a 1 year development cycle, when you have a game that has to come out next like less than 12 months after the game just fired off, like you have
You're very
like
limited as to what you can do.
exactly, and that's a problem. Like the fact of
Oh
the matter
yeah,
is, back in the day, like first of all, PS2, you could develop a PS2 game. Like you saw, like stuff like Ratchet and Clank, Jack and Daxter. You could develop a high quality. like game in 1 year back in the PS2 era. But nowadays, like it takes multiple. If you want to develop like a serious, like high quality, like new game, it takes multiple years to do that
Of
nowadays because of
course.
how inflated development budgets are. How there's like hundreds or thousands of people working on games, and how every game is like every big game is like tens of millions of dollars in their budget or
Yes.
more.
Very, very high budget games, definitely. And yeah, that's they're kind of like putting themselves in a box almost essentially, and I think that's is probably the main reason that we see those trends in a lot of things. And it's not just, we're not picking on any franchise in particular because a lot of
At,
franchises do
yet,
this.
yet,
Yet, yeah. I
other than
mean,
the
we'll pick on a
WWE
lot of
thing.
different franchises, but there are a lot of them that do this. And the reason that I mentioned Call of Duty, that's a big one for me because I've never been a huge Call of Duty fan. I've played Call of Duty 3 back in 2006, I think it was probably the one that I've played the most, and it was like it was okay, but I never really got like super into it because Call of Duty has always been just like generic shooter like 1.0 for me, and it just never really has grabbed me that much. But the fact of the matter that I've done the research is Call of Duty has put out an average of 2 games a year for the past about, I want to say, 13 to 14 years, because the new Call of Duty, which I believe is Black Ops 4, which is coming out in October of this year, I believe it is going to be the 27th Call of Duty game overall. That is 15 mainline games and 12 spin-off games. So that's a lot of freaking games, obviously. So
Yeah, for
that's a
sure.
big
But
problem to me.
that's
That's
not
just way
just
too
because
much content, way too
just
much
just
product.
well, just because they release a lot of games isn't necessarily bad. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of the games are very similar.
Right.
I mean, I guess
That's the
there's like
point.
two. There's two main studios that produce Call of Duty. Last I checked, and they kind of do an alternating yearly schedule. Which one of
Right.
them was actually free on PlayStation Plus not too long ago. I don't know if you downloaded that, but I did.
I
I
did
haven't.
not.
I actually haven't played it yet, but I'll play it. I'm sure eventually. Just like we'll release a video on Crash Live Gaming eventually.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. Eventually,
But
quote
that's really the
unquote,
thing. That's really
eventually.
the thing is like, why do you think they're releasing so many Call of Duty games? And one of the things is because the market is really not friendly to new game IPs at all, and
No,
they
no,
sell
it's
their
not.
name. They want to sell the name over substance. Because think about what we were just saying about development costs. Like, look at I could you could probably Google right now. Go ahead, Google it. Like what were the cost? Like look up like the top like 5 games of last year and look at what their development costs were. That's another
Yeah.
thing is like development costs nowadays they go far beyond just the game being released because after the game is released it needs like a shit ton of like after release support, right?
Right.
Like you need to update. They need to they're constantly releasing like content like microtransactions. They ship games that aren't complete so they can charge you for shit later. They're still building stuff.
That's another huge one that's going to be discussed
We'll get to
extensively
that.
here.
We'll get to that later. But
Yes.
there's they're charging you for incomplete games, and then they're like because they make the game so quick, they don't finish the game, so they do it as good as they like duct tape it together, send it out the door, and then they try and like you know piece like tape a couple more pieces on as the game goes on, but it really never feels like a complete product ever.
Yeah, that's what I was starting with Star Wars. That was one of the reasons I wanted to bring up Star Wars early, is because the last two Star
We'll
Wars
get to
games,
Star Wars. Don't you worry.
Battlefront and
We will.
Battlefront 2, did pretty much all these things. Like they're pretty much the personification of what's wrong with the new wave of multiplayer games, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I mean, so we'll definitely get to Star Wars, but we talk a lot. I talked a lot about Star Wars on Crash Love Gaming. There's a lot of videos about
Indeed.
Star Wars on our channel.
Yes.
Uh, but like I can see it from the company standpoint. Like big companies want a proven formula because they don't want to invest like a shit ton because of how expensive the development costs are. They don't want to invest a shit ton of money into a game series from like either a new developer or a new series or something that has these wild new ideas. Like
That might not work
actually
in their eyes,
actually
yeah.
these wild new ideas like actually making a competent game.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah,
they want
that's a
some. They
foreign
want like this.
concept.
They want the same cut and paste shit that people have been buying for 10 years.
Yeah, and that's
Think about it
another
from their
thing.
perspective. Like it's cheaper to just release another Madden than to like, and it's a whole hell of a lot less risk as long as it can stay profitable than it is to like start a new IP or it is to like really innovate the Madden series or really innovate the WWE 2K series.
Oh yeah, and that's I was gonna say sports games, which I know neither of us really play sports games too much, if at all. Those are another huge offender of that, which is like okay, they get like Madden, NBA, whatever, FIFA for soccer.
I
It's all
got I
pretty
got
much the same thing. Is they just keep releasing like the same game every year, basically. And yeah, they have updated rosters and they have tweaks here and there to the systems, but it's like it's for all intensive purposes, it's the same thing. So
Like I
you
got a
know.
client who's 12 and he's still wowed by the yearly Madden releases. And I remember back when his age, we used to get the WWE games every year,
Yes,
but
yes, we
they
did.
weren't as but they weren't as like formulaic as they were like now, because like think about like they added in like GM mode, they added in back in the old SmackDown versus
Like
Raw games, they added in
2006, I
like
think, or something.
yeah, like stuff kind of changed. It's kind of like the thing is after like 2008 or 9 ish, that's when everything started to stagnate and kind of go to shit like the last 10 ish years.
Yeah,
But
I was going to say it's only been bad for about 10 years now. And actually, that I think tracks a point I was going to make, which is over the past decade, I think it is, that's when we've really started to see the decline in quality in pretty much all these things, like again, what I will refer to as Call of Duty syndrome, which is just, copy and paste the same game every year.
or have we? But we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
Uh,
But yeah, I've,
I mean,
for
reality might just be an illusion.
Sure, but yeah, for those of you guys who don't know, I'm a huge pro wrestling fan, as are you, and I used to, buy those.
I wouldn't say I'm a huge pro wrestling fan
Well,
anymore.
fine, you're not huge, but I am, and I used to buy those games, like the yearly release games, until about 2010, I want to say, and then I realized I was like, wait a minute, I'm just buying the same game over and over again. Like, yeah, the roster is updated and like it's tweaked,
When
the
you get to the point where
mechanics, but
you realize you have a job, and it's like I like nowadays I buy basically one new game per year, and last year it was Battlefront 2, and I
and
was really fucking disappointed in
and yet
that.
here you are sitting on a gaming podcast, is
I, I
buying
still
one new game a year,
well
which is
I still replay Ratchet and Clank games all the time.
yeah. I mean, I can't disagree with you in this.
I still replay the classics.
Right, right, and I can't disagree with you in the sense that I've gotten to the point where it's like I see what they're doing.
I would rather play a 10, 15, 20-year-old game than like buy any of these new games for the most part.
Yeah, I
Like
would.
again, I'd rather play them again, or I'd rather look at an old game that I kind of overlooked like years ago and say, well, hey, maybe I'd rather buy that because it's only like $10 now.
Yeah, that's a big thing. I think is that you know, it's just with the whole copy and paste thing, and you're bound to lose, some people with that.
Because do I really want to play this? What is boils down to like 90% of the same game again, or do I want to like maybe like experience something entirely new for a lot less money?
Right, yeah, and that's where, I sit as well, is that, I, for the most
The
part,
fact of the matter
a
is,
lot of the new
somewhere around
games just have
somewhere
that
around
problem.
yeah, the fact of the matter is, somewhere around 2008, I stopped being a big enough wrestling fan to justify that purchase.
Yeah, and
So
it's kind of the same. I use wrestling as an example because I'm a wrestling fan, but the same can be said for pretty much all the sports related games. Like I said, NFL, NBA, FIFA for soccer, MLB, anything, UFC. The list goes
I
on and
think
on.
UFC's been a little bit better, fortunately. Like they don't release games as frequently, and they tend to have bigger updates.
Yeah,
But it's
they're not as bad of an offender for the simple fact that they don't release the games quite as frequently. Plus, they haven't been releasing games for as long, I don't think, as a lot of those other franchises.
ask
Um,
Andrew. There's only like a handful of UFC games, so it's not that
right,
bad.
yeah. So,
But
and that's
here,
better, because if you're gonna do that, if you're gonna do that, then in every other year release kind of makes it better because there's more of an updated, like to update the rosters or stuff like that. It's better, bigger in
so
a
here's a
bigger
scenario.
gap.
Here's a scenario for you.
Hmm.
You're like a bigwig at one of like EA or something, one of these big companies,
Hmm.
and you have an option. Like you can just keep releasing the same. Like okay, here we have the next Battlefield game, or we have the next like FIFA game. I think EA does FIFA,
Yeah,
and you can do that. Or they're like, okay, here's a different developer that wants to like they want to like make a crazy new soccer game that like involves like explosions and power ups, and like it's back like it's like an NBA Jam style soccer game, like
yeah.
back except for on like the PS4, but they're like we're gonna modernize it. And it's gonna be crazy, man. And people love this back in the early to 2000s or whatever.
Hmm.
Like, what do you say? What do you stick with the same old shit, or do you take a risk and possibly you lose millions of dollars in your job?
Well, of course you're not going to take the risk, and that's the I think the underlying problem here is that there are still so many people that are buying these copy and pasted games that the people in charge making these decisions would be crazy to not do that. So they would, in order for them to change their ways, there would have to
At the
be
end of the
enough
day,
of a decline in sales that would motivate them to say, okay, the same old stale shit is not selling anymore, so we have to up our game and we have to change the game in order to bring people in. But as long as there are so many people still buying the copy and pasted, games with the, minor tweaks, which a lot of people still are, you're like, if you were an executive making that decision, you'd have to be crazy to say, oh, well, I can do this, which is a guaranteed profit, or I can take a risk on this, which is not a guaranteed profit. It's a no-brainer.
the problem is, well, one of the problems is you look at those games and it's kind of like their sales keep going, like WWE 2K. I think their sales keep going. They're like slowly like sliding like downward,
Yeah,
and it's kind of like a law of diminishing returns. Like they can only do that for so long, and
right, but
eventually
it's
it's
not
going to get to
enough.
the
That's
point.
my point, is that it's not enough to
Yeah,
get yet. It's not enough to get them to change their formula or
you
change
got
their
to take.
minds.
But I don't know. You got to take the risk at some point. Like it just keeps sliding lower and lower those sales numbers, and eventually it's gonna get to the point where it's not profitable. And then what are they gonna do? Then then what are they gonna do?
Then they're going to be Battlefront at that point.
Oh, Battlefront kind of is a different story entirely.
Well, they're at the bottom of the pit. I think, because I think we all, for those of you who don't know, we all bought, and by we all I mean the two of us, along with the
Men from
gaming.
Crash Love Gaming.
Yeah, the members of the men at Crash Love Gaming plus me, we all were kind of excited to get into Star Wars Battlefront 2 last year when it came out, and we're all wholeheartedly disappointed with what we purchased. So,
Yeah, I'm not gonna say I'm wholeheartedly disappointed, but there's a
oh, I
lot.
will.
I have a lot of bullet points, and I'm gonna mention Battlefront in a lot of them. But basically, like nowadays, uh, as we said, there's a formula, and that formula often includes microtransactions.
Yes, another huge issue facing the multiplayer online gaming world, the misuse of
It really
microtransactions.
grinds my gears. Full priced games with fucking shit you gotta buy with microtransactions.
Enter Battlefront 2, or at least what Battlefront 2 was supposed to be originally, until they ripped it all out and messed it up even more.
And FIFA. Okay,
Yeah.
so say what you're gonna say about Battlefront.
Okay, so Battlefront, the original Star Wars Battlefront PS4 release 2015, I believe. Biggest issue with that game was lack of content to me. And yes, they tried to patch it up with the DLC and all that kind of stuff, and it was what it was. But at the end of the day, it wasn't a terrible game. Like, I got some, enjoyment value out of playing it and all that stuff. It was fun to an extent. There wasn't like a ton of replay value in the game due to lack of content, but there was some, to the point where I was like, okay, whatever. But with Battlefront 2, it was like we were promised, that all the problems of Battlefront 1 were going to go away and that everything was going to be great. And then here, everything just went to shit even farther with the second Battlefront, which was released last year in 2017. And
Okay, I just want to say this. Okay, I had to Google the stats real quick.
yeah,
Oh shit, what happened? Man, Tim got infected by a virus. Uh, Fucking hell.
well, if this podcast crashes, folks, then you know why.
It's Crash Love Gaming. Okay, so I just lost the number, but I gotta remember. Basically, okay, yeah, okay. Thank you for telling me, Norton Antivirus. I gotta X out 17 messages now. Okay,
Awesome.
so in 2017, so some of these numbers are 2017, some of them are 2018, but I'm assuming they're not too far off. In 2018, uh, Electronic Arts had $5.15 billion in revenue,
Okay.
and they had $1.68 billion in 2017
Hmm.
in just microtransactions. So that means that like roughly a quarter of their business is microtransactions,
Yep.
if not more.
Yeah.
Because the 17 numbers, if anything, those went up in 2018.
Yeah.
So like you see this trend of microtransactions. There's no fucking way you're not trying to put them in every game you possibly can.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. You'd be stupid not to, because that's kind of the wave of the future, so to speak, or so we're seeing anyway, is that, that's what
It's what
people
the
do.
people. It's what the people clamor for. The
I
people
mean, I
clamor for
don't know that
shit.
any gamer necessarily enjoys the microtransaction concept, because I sure
The
as hell don't.
but the people buy the shit.
Yeah, that's what I don't understand is that so we have these issues and yet, we're here talking about them and we're not indulging in actually, doing it and, supporting the microtransactions or, buying any of this stuff. And yet there are a lot of people who are complaining about it, but yet the sales numbers just keep going up and it's like what the hell? Like you have to figure a good number of these people who are complaining about it are also the ones out there buying this shit. So it's like what the hell?
I bought something on Fortnite, but that's a different story
Yeah,
for
I
a
was
little
gonna
bit
say
later.
Fortnite. In my opinion, well, I mean, we'll talk more about Fortnite later, but I think Fortnite is kind of one of the beacons of hope in our world of diminishing quality of multiplayer
In
online
some
gaming.
ways, in
In
some ways.
somewhat, yes. So
But here's the thing, like one of the games that really grinds my gears that gets a free pass for some reason is Overwatch. Like Overwatch was a full price game, and there was actually games like there was actually like three versions of Overwatch, and the cheapest version was like a full price game, right? But the most
right.
expensive version it was like $120 that came with like skins and shit. But
Hmm.
that's essentially my problem with Overwatch is the game releases content like it basically releases skins instead of content. Like there's been a couple new characters
Yeah,
and a couple new maps, but like instead of basically there's substitution for like oh
content
they're
is
like oh,
skins.
yeah they said oh yeah we're gonna have new content. It's like new weapon skins, new fucking player skins, new emotes, new like paint shit, like paint jobs or like fucking like graffiti signs. Like
Yep,
that's the type of shit
that's not
that's
content.
like as a gamer that's not the stuff that interests me. Like I don't care if my guy has like I mean like I like a cool skin as much as the next guy, but I really don't care if my guy has looks like a fucking looks like total shit or exactly the same as
That's not
everybody
the
else.
kind of content that true gamers care about, in my
It's not
opinion,
the
because I don't either. It's like, I
it's not
mean,
the kind of content that really
give me
matters.
levels, give me weapons, give me something to do
A
in the
new game
game.
mode, a new
Yeah,
game mode.
exactly. Yeah, don't give me, a bunch of new skins and say, oh, we got all this new content coming out. It's like, no,
And then
you don't.
especially because it's like then you got to buy it too. It's like oh, but then it's such a like beautiful like fucking uh loophole they found themselves because they can basically make a ton of cheap uh, content that is not they can say oh well it's not required or it's not giving you any advantage and you don't have to buy it right but they still make a shit ton of money off it anyway because people are like impulsive and they want to buy this shit because they want to make their guy look cool or
Yeah.
so it's like a beautiful loophole like they are implementing all this shit they're kind of taking advantage of people who are somewhat addicted to this gambling style mentality of the loot boxes or the microtransactions, and at the same time they're able to like pull the card of like, hey, but just non-essential items, and they're not giving you any advantage. They're just cosmetic. That's the term. It's cosmetic, right?
Right. And see, for me, I think, for certain games, and again, Fortnite is one of them for me. Um, I'm okay with that to an extent. Like, okay, so let me say this:
Fortnite
loot
is a totally
boxes.
different Fortnite is a totally different animal, and we'll talk more on that
Right, right,
later.
right. But as far as I'm concerned, as a gamer, loot boxes are just complete shit, in my opinion. It's like, okay, you're paying
Right.
actual, real, physical money, like real world money, US dollars, if you live in the United States, for a maybe, for a chance at something, which is just full
A
blown
chance,
gambling, is what it is, which is
it's a
bullshit, in my
chance. It's a
opinion,
chance at
because you
something with.
pay all this
You,
money for this game to begin with, and then you're paying more money for the chance to get something else in the game.
know what's hilariously like the defense of the developers to that is that gambling is when you're gambling you have the potential of winning something that has some value but everything you're buying in the game or it might get in the loot box has no value.
No real
That's
world value. Well, that's the
that
thing. Yeah,
well that's
is
actually the developers defense on why it's not gambling is because basically what they're selling you is worthless. That's literally their defense.
I never saw that, but that's pretty funny actually. It's because they are telling the truth, but it's like way to just make everybody who's ever bought a loot box from you feel like a complete
But that's the
moron.
thing is like they all don't even think that way. They're just like, well, yeah, they're right. The people who buy the loot boxes are like, yeah, they're right, or it has sentimental value to me, something like that.
Whatever, but so here's the one thing I will say as far as like purchasing cosmetic upgrades to your guys, to an extent that might play to, people saying, "Oh, I want my guy to look cool, whatever, X, Y, and Z." But I'm, largely okay with that, to a certain extent, just because again, it doesn't actually affect your progress in game. So that's actually not the worst thing in the world for me, as long as it's a guarantee. Like I said, there's a difference
It's
between
still
loot
shit.
boxes and not. See,
I
and
think
again, that was
I
one
think it's all
point.
shit. I think loot boxes in terms of like a random reward you get, but I think like I just
No,
think the
buying
fact
a
that
loot box is complete shit. I agree with you there. As far as like on Fortnite, for example, like buying a skin for your guy. So the one reason that I will give Fortnite a pass on a lot of stuff here is because Fortnite's free. So it's like, okay,
well, that's one big reason.
yeah, so I'll say, okay, like if they're
Also,
going to
second of
present
all,
you with this
Fortnite.
free game and then give you the option to spend some money on it by buying a skin, I'm okay with that. Now, I'm a little bit more sketchy or skeptical of it in games that you pay a full $60 American for, and then have these expensive skins on them. Like that's a little shadier, but it is what it is.
Plus, the other thing why Fortnite kind of gets a pass from me is because Fortnite is a brand new, innovative IP that's actually doing something well. Now it's like becoming a fad, but at the time, I know
It
it
was a
also kind
crazy
of
new thing when it was
it
released way
it
back
also
last year.
it also kind of copied like the battle royal mode kind of copied player unknown battlegrounds, but I mean it really like innovated and popularized it because of the way it worked. So
Right.
like Fortnite gets a pass for me because it's because it's a new IP and it's doing something different. And I will give a game like that a pass over something like FIFA that's like the same fucking game, but then they just added microtransactions,
Yep.
right?
Or
But
again,
like
Battlefront.
plus a fully priced game at the same time.
Right.
And so yeah, microtransactions. The point of this is microtransactions are more profitable than actual content because they're easier to make. They can pull out the card of like, hey, you don't need to, and it's true though. Like more people will spend money on the loot boxes than will buy like quality DLC. It's actually fucking been proven. Like
Yeah.
it's sad, but it's true. Like, and the problem about that is the thing about that is it's because with the with loot boxes, you have these people who will buy like hundreds or thousands of loot boxes and spend hundreds or thousands of dollars on them. But with DLC, you can only buy that shit once, right?
Right. Yeah. So
But with loot boxes, you can just keep buying them and buying them.
yeah, so that's, obviously from a developer standpoint and trying to take advantage of the consumer, that's the profit that they're looking for is that, that loot box, which again to me, loot boxes in any capacity in any game are just complete and utter bullshit to me because you
I'm
should
not
not
necessarily
be.
actually gonna. I'm not gonna actually agree with that entirely because
Well, okay,
I
if a loot box that you actually pay real money for, like loot boxes that you use in-game currency for that you just earn, like it's a little reward, whatever, I don't care. But loot
yeah, that's
boxes
good.
that you pay actual real-world money for are just complete bullshit, in my opinion.
Generally, I would 100% agree. But the fact that microtransactions are more profitable than actual content is just like you think about it, it's they're basically milking their core demographic or their most loyal fans for as much as they're worth,
Yep.
right? Because if you had to release, first of all, if you had to release quality DLC, it would actually have to be quality
For anyone
because
to
you
want to
have to get
buy it, it would have to
yes
be quality content.
no
Yeah.
because you need to get like a lot of people to buy it or everyone to buy it to make it profitable, right? Whereas with
Right.
microtransactions you can just milk the same like 10% of your that's the thing is like I think it's something like 90% plus of all microtransactions are done by like less than 10% of the audience of the game.
Yep. And that's
like
that's where the easy money comes
like
from.
yeah, they just milk their most loyal fans for as much money as they possibly can get, whereas if they were to release actual quality content they couldn't do that, and
Of
the
course.
content would have to be better and take more effort for them to create, and it would give them less of a return.
Right. So
So
again, we find ourselves in the same situation as before. Is that if you're the CEO of the gaming company sitting there, like, which one are you going to do? Are you going to take the easy money that takes advantage of people? Well, of course you are. If your consumers are going to allow you to do that, if they're going to let you get away with it, of course you're going to do it.
and it kind of also comes down to economies of scale at some points. Like the really big developers have enough of a base that like their 10% that they can milk is going to be a shit ton of money, whereas like a small developer, like might have a super loyal fan base, but they want like actual quality DLC, right? Like
Right.
that's why you see like a lot of the smaller games releasing like actual quality DLC and having better content than the
The
bigger
big name
games,
games. Yep.
the big name
Absolutely.
games. Yeah, because they actually need to make their fans happy rather than just fucking like appealing to the lowest common denominator and milking people for every cent they're worth.
Yep. That is pretty much all accurate, and I definitely agree with all that. That's just kind of the nature of the game at this point,
And
unfortunately.
will this my next bullet point is, will this ever end? Will this cycle ever end? And
The
I think
only
the
answer
answer,
I have is only if the fans decide to end it.
I don't actually think. I think the answer of will it ever end is yes, but the thing is, it might take a long time because eventually, either A, the fans are going to wise up and kind of like, or B, the law of diminishing returns, like we said with the re-releases and everything, it
Yep.
goes sales trend downward, so they keep have to implementing more and more of these predatory practices to make more and more money off the less and less people who are buying the games, right? They
Yes.
have to basically find like the most gambling addicted people possible, the most weak and freaking vulnerable targets that they can possibly identify, and get
Sadly,
them to
yes.
be their their target demographic, and then milk them for everything they're worth. But the thing is that keeps shrinking. As that keeps shrinking smaller and smaller, then the more predatory their practices get, the more evident it gets that they're predatory, right?
Yeah, and the more
So
people wise up and say, "Hey, the hell with this. I'm not, gonna get into this."
I think eventually it's going to be a house of cards that's going to collapse. And then there's also the looming possibility of legislation that might like ban loot boxes, because they might, or maybe ban them for kids over the age of 18 or under the age of 18, because then it would
Right.
any game that would have like loot boxes would be considered gambling, and it would need to have an 18 plus adult only rating on it, and then those adult only games sell like shit, so they would lose like 90% of their audience if that happened.
Yeah. So that would
So
that would actually be a positive thing in my opinion if that went
I
through. I
agree.
mean, who knows if
I
it
agree.
will, but
But like yeah, I agree with that. But I think eventually there's going to be like the dominoes are going to fall, and everything is just going to collapse. And whether that's going to like have huge repercussions, and like gaming is going to have another crash like back in the Atari days, or like if everything is just going to be like a blip on the radar and everything's going to like keep going, and they're just going to move on to the next deceptive practice,
I
or
think more than likely that's what's going to happen
that's
because
yeah.
if you think about it,
I
gaming
I,
is
I
so much bigger now than it was back then that I don't see it just like full blown crashing. But
Yeah, and also like it's kind of like they, by the time, they probably already see the writing on the wall with this, so they're probably already like planning their exit straight. Like all the big companies are like EA and
I would assume so. Yeah,
Blizzard
they're
and
already they
Activision.
already have
They're
the
probably
contingency
already,
plan.
well, I'm not sure if they have the contingency plan yet, but they're all thinking about that. So they probably think like, okay, if we get legislated as adult only games, like what's our next move going to be? Right? Like how are we going to
Yeah.
how are we going to basically move the goalposts so we're still safe, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that's kind of what it comes down to. Yeah, definitely.
And I
So,
think like they're never going to be, if they're smart, they're probably never going to be behind. Well, they may never get caught entirely with that. But and
yeah.
the other thing is, maybe someday someone will come along, like some of the higher ups will say, hey, you know what? We're sick of fucking taking advantage of people. That's never gonna happen.
I was gonna say, what the hell are you talking about? Yeah, that's never gonna happen. Like I said, in my opinion, the only way that this vicious cycle that we find ourselves in with the copy and paste games, and the B, the abuse of microtransactions and loot boxes, the only way that really ends, aside from there being a law to end it, is if enough of the fan base says enough, we don't want this crap, we want quality content released like was released back in the day and then
I
um
think it's I think it's inevitable that something's going to happen that's going to basically make the house of cards fall down. Either, whether it's that, whether it's
definitely.
legislation, whether it's their decreasing audience just getting too small for them to milk them to make it profitable anymore, whether or not it's like gaming just kind of like moves, like, because console gaming is kind of shrinking a little bit, and if it goes like entirely mobile, or like VR becomes like the only way to game, or something happens where the market just like shifts, I think eventually like this isn't going to stay forever. Like
Right.
if
This
there's
is
one
just
thing true
kind of
about,
the situation we find ourselves in now the last several
yeah,
years,
and
but
is it any better or worse than how it was or how it will be? Well, maybe we'll talk about that in a little bit. I've been teasing it like the whole time, but we'll talk about that shortly.
yes.
uh, so uh, here's the other thing is, one thing that pisses me off about multiplayer gaming, a lot of multiplayer games nowadays, is the on the rails repeated scenario type gameplay. And let me explain. If you play Battlefront 2, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because every single large scale battle plays out exactly the same way. You have the same spawn points, you have the same objectives that repeat themselves over and over again, and the map the area of the map moves because they're trying to concentrate gameplay in specific areas. And so many big games do shit like that, like Battlefield, Call of Duty, mainly shooters and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
that's another reason why Fortnite gets a pass from me. Is Fortnite is very open ended in the way the
Yes.
game operates, which is to me is a very appealing way for a game to operate. I'm not a fan of the games that just funnel you somewhere and just tell you like every game is going to play out exactly the same way because this is how this is how this game just does it, just because well, for them it's probably easier because they don't have to worry about like
Right.
balance is easier when everybody's going to the exact same areas at the exact same time every time,
Right.
right?
Well, variance is always a good thing in my opinion when it comes to the
Developers
online multiplayers. So
But to
I agree
developers,
with
they
that.
see variance as like more work because it's more shit they have to think about when balancing the game.
Right, of course, and again, that goes back to the old, copy and paste to make a buck. But yeah, no, that's definitely true. Is you want variance, and I thought for a second you were going to dip into the realm of Pokemon, which is something that I haven't talked about. I know you're not a big Pokemon fan, um, but I did briefly want to mention me being almost an exclusively Pokemon related. That's great. Pokemon related YouTuber is that. Pokemon kind of does the same thing with the copy and paste too as the others, but I will give them a half pass in my opinion on that because they are always constantly coming out with new stuff. Like, yeah, they do, not yearly releases all the time, but they do come out with new Pokemon, new characters, new items, new things. In the last couple of generations of Pokemon, we've had gimmicks like in Gen 6 they had Mega Evolutions, in Gen 7 they had Z moves in Alolan form. So it's like they are trying new things to try and change things up a little bit. Again, to a point they are still stuck in that same copy and paste, but
Yeah, that's
I do
you
give them
sound like
credit for
you
trying
sound like
some stuff.
you sound like a Madden player just telling me about how the new replay feature is so innovative.
No, I mean it's something that you'd have to really play the game to understand, but yeah, it's really like I said, that's why I said I'll only give it a half pass is because to an extent Pokemon is an offender just like all these other games. Like I said, we mentioned the sports games, we mentioned the shooter games. We didn't really talk about the fighting games too much, but those are kind of the same too. Like you have the Dragon Ball Z games, you have Marvel versus Capcom, you have
Street Fighter.
DC versus Mortal Kombat, so on and so
I haven't
forth.
once. Street Fighter.
Yeah, Street Fighter as well. So they kind of do the same thing as well. It's like the tweaking of the
Okay, so
characters
here's the
and
thing about
stuff.
fighting games is fighting games have a very specific way they operate. So minor tweaks to fighting styles can have a big effect on the actual way the game like plays or the way the game
Right.
is. Like to the average person, Super Smash Brothers Brawl and Super Smash Brothers Melee look very similar, but if you play the games and you get into the fighting systems, they're very different.
Right.
So and stuff like that. Again, that stuff is not like a yearly release type thing. I mean, sure, there's like 7 versions of Street Fighter 4, which
Yeah.
I think is kind of stupid, but I also see those as kind of like a greatest hits type thing. And at the
Right.
same time, now that I think about it, that is kind of another offender on the list is like the 7 versions of Street Fighter 4. But
Yeah.
at this,
Yeah,
at
but
this
those I think we focus less on that kind of stuff because there's varying degrees of the whole copy and paste thing that we deal with in different game franchises, and I think the reason that we target stuff like the sports games and the shooters like Call of Duty is that in those game franchises it's a lot worse. Like the copy and pasting is a lot worse in my opinion than in
also because
other game
it's a yearly
franchises.
thing, and they do it. They literally just number them with the year.
Oh yeah,
They
like
don't do that.
2K 18, 17, 16, so
Or
on and so
Madden
forth.
12, Madden 15, Madden whatever.
Madden
But
27.
yeah,
Yeah.
but one of the games that, like in the last couple of years, that came out that I actually thought was really good, and it didn't stick microtransactions anywhere, and it was somewhat innovative, was Titanfall 2, and of course that game did not sell very well. It got
Yeah.
really good reviews, but it did not sell very well, and the multiplayer community almost immediately fell off because it didn't have microtransactions. I guess that's what people want.
Why
That's what
would
they.
see that's still something that I'm kind of like having a hard time wrapping my head around is like as a gamer, why would you want microtransactions? Like it
because it's
doesn't
because it's like popcorn. It's easy, I guess, and it's. I don't know if
it's
they
just a waste
necessarily.
of money at the end. I mean, maybe if you're
I don't think
raiding
it's
your mom's
necessarily
purse for her credit card, like sure, but
like
like if you're
like
a
a certain
regular
person,
person,
a certain person we all know whose name starts with S and ends with Steve.
Oh, shit. Yeah, well, whatever, sure. But he doesn't even actually game, to be honest. Like, he doesn't play console games, ironically. But
But it was a joke.
yeah, no, I know, I get it, I get what you're saying, but yeah, but my point is like to like the average person, it just feels like the whole microtransaction thing is like it's just a ripoff, you know? Like it I
I
don't
honestly
get why
don't
so
think
many
it's.
people like it.
I honestly don't think it's so much that they like it as it's like having really poor impulse control. Like they just buy
That
the
could be it.
microtransactions, and then they're kind of like, oh yeah, well I got this skin, so I'm gonna play this game more. And then they play the game more, and then they're like, oh maybe I should buy another skin, and then it just that's how it starts.
Yeah, I mean that could definitely be part of it, I would
I
think.
don't think they, and then they kind of like eventually they kind of like buy into the Kool-Aid of like, oh yeah, it's not essential, and all the lines of like, oh yeah, well I'm just supporting a game I like and stuff like that, right?
And you know, to be completely honest with you, I do agree with that to a certain extent. Now, if you're spending like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars on this stuff, then that's where you lose me. But if you're
But that's where
spending
they
like
make their
a
real money
couple of
is the people
bucks,
who do that.
no, I understand that, but I'm saying like from again from a practicality standpoint for the average person, I understand like if you wanted to spend like $10, $20, whatever, something that's, you know, not a huge amount of money on something like that. I'm completely, you know, for that, to be honest with you, especially again going back to Fortnite, on a game like Fortnite that was free, that's fine. But when you get to be, you know, like that minority of individuals that are spending like obscene amounts of money on this stuff, that's where you definitely lose me there. And I think that's just crazy. But,
I
you know,
think there's never been more variation in games than there is nowadays, while simultaneously there being less variation. And by that I mean there's so many different types of games out there nowadays, like more genres, more subgenres, more releases than ever.
right.
And but the thing is, at the same time, like the vast majority of mainstream attention and like the vast majority of the player base and the vast majority of the budget and the vast majority of money and the vast majority of everything goes to like a select few games that kind of like get the attention of like the whole world, and then probably like 10% of the audience is split between everything else.
Yeah, it definitely feels like that. It definitely feels, you know, over centralized, if that's what you're saying. Because I remember, even back as recently as like the PS3 days, you know, like you had, you know, it just felt like you had so much more, and it felt like
That's the other thing.
developers
It feels like
cared
everything's
more
like
about like
homogenized.
providing a quality product than they do now.
It feels like everything's homogenized because back in like PlayStation and that gen, PS3, 360, Wii generation, it was like a vicious console war of like all three consoles kind of hated each other and they all wanted to beat the other one. Whereas nowadays
Yeah,
everybody's just like, well, Xbox and PS4 are basically the same thing, and Switch is
yeah,
cool too, and they're just over there doing their thing. But it's like nobody really cares about like beating the competition, or like it's just all kind of like a race to the bottom of like who can, you know, and all the multi-platform things that like having different content or like additional content on different platforms is like not really much of a thing anymore. Like it used
right.
to, it used to be like sometimes exclusive, or like multi-platform games would have like PS3 exclusive stuff or like Xbox 360 exclusive
That was
stuff.
a yeah, that was a big deal back last generation having, you know, like, and I remember because this is a game that we played a lot, with PS3 and Resistance being like their big launch title exclusive. Like that was
Well,
a
not even that,
big
but I'm
thing
talking
back
about
then, you
games
know.
that were on both consoles would sometimes have exclusive content for one
For one of
console.
the
Where
well,
now
Resident Evil did some of that. That's another game that we have played quite a lot, like, you know, with the that back in that generation. But yeah, that was kind of a thing back then. Is
that was
that
a that was
meant
a
something back then to have stuff like that?
that was a good
So
series of Let's Plays, by the way, when we played the mercenary modes on the Resident Evil.
that seems like quite a while ago, but yes, that was
it
pretty
was
fun. But
it was 2 years ago.
that would qualify as quite a while ago, yes. But yeah, that's kind of the thing nowadays, and especially I think with the emergence of PC gaming, because PC gaming, at least in my opinion anyway, wasn't anywhere near as big of a thing back then as it is now. So that's a whole
Here's the other
nother
thing.
animal
It's
that
it's still
changes the
like
game as well.
PC gaming is part of like that 10% that is everybody else.
Right.
So it's like what I'm saying is still very true.
Right. No, I agree with that. I'm just saying that, you know, even like PC gaming this generation
If
is
you look
so
at a
much
multi,
bigger than last generation.
I mean, but still, we're talking like 1% versus 2%, and it's like,
Well,
so in the grand scheme of things, it's awful. It's not an awful lot, but I don't think anyway. And if you look at like the game sales of like games, or like the player base of games that are multi-platform and also come on PC, it's like I remember the first Battlefront in 2015. I remember looking at like the players, and it was like PlayStation 4 be like, there's a million people online. 360, oh, there's like 700,000 people online. PC, there's like 10,000 people online.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's like it's literally like that small, and that's not like the
right.
exception to the rule. That's like the average.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there's not like the majority of gamers are definitely going to be console versus PC, but still, it's definitely the PC the demographic of PC, or the amount of people that are
And the
PC
and
gamers are definitely on the rise.
but the reason for that is because that's where the money is. That's where all the microtransactions are coming from. That's where like PC games get pirated to shit all the time. The consoles are where all the money is.
Yeah, yeah, that is true, definitely. So it's like,
So what's the deal? Like, okay, so inflated development budgets, and the massive develop like any like that's the thing is like because of how complex and expensive all the hardware is nowadays. Like, how much money do they need to make a first party game? And everybody's always trying to make the next, blip of graphical increase in power,
yeah,
right?
everybody's trying to be the next Fortnite, basically. Again, like something that just kind of came out of nowhere, and everybody was like,
Oh,
"Oh my God, this is what we
I'm
want,"
not sure
you
if
know?
I'm not sure if everybody. Fortnite's kind of an exception. Like, everybody would like to be the next Fortnite, but I'm not sure if
Right.
people are really trying to actively be that, because Fortnite, I feel like, honestly,
Well, I don't
Fortnite
mean
ending. One of the reasons why I like Fortnite is because I feel like Fortnite ending up where it was a total fluke. Like,
to an
Fortnite
extent, yeah,
becoming
but what I mean that everybody wants to be the next Fortnite is not like specifically the gameplay or anything having to do with that. I mean, everybody wants to be the next game that kind of comes out of nowhere, and like everybody
I
hops on
mean,
the bandwagon and
they
it
would
becomes
like to,
big.
but I don't think like a lot of big companies are really actively trying to do that because of how it's such a crapshoot.
Right. Yeah, no, definitely. I mean,
Fortnite was definitely an anomaly and definitely a fluke that it got so popular.
yes. Yeah, I would, to an extent, I would agree with that. Yeah.
When
But
Fortnite first came out, everybody thought, especially because it was just like a building, like tower defense game. Everybody
yeah.
thought it was going to be either like range somewhere from like moderate success to total flop.
Yeah, and obviously that was. I mean, I correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe as of now it is the most popular multiplayer game in the
It
world right
it was the
now.
most popular
Actually,
game period in the world for probably like since the beginning of the year, and I think it's probably still the most
I
popular game in
believe
the
so.
like
Yeah, I
it's been the
believe
most
so.
popular game in the world for a while, which is like, yeah, most games usually don't
That really
last
says
that long.
something, and that's a big point that I want to bring up now that I think we've gotten to Fortnite. We can talk, exclusively about Fortnite now. My
Oh, I have two more things to talk about before we
Before
get to do
Fortnite,
that. We have the inflated development budgets that we were talking about, right? And
sure,
why is that happening? Well, the biggest thing is the cost of the hardware, right? And everything like developing for the PS4 is more expensive than the PS3, which was more expensive than the
sure.
PS2. Everybody complained about the PS3 being expensive. Now the PS4 is even more expensive, and everybody only. I mean, this isn't true. I really don't think it's true. Maybe it is, but like developers seem to think everybody cares a lot about graphics, and they need to have the most cutting edge graphics on the
And
triple
actually,
A
that
games.
feeds perfectly into my Fortnite point. Is that look at Fortnite, like, yeah, the graphics are nice, but they're not like these ultra like realistic graphics that game developers apply so much time and effort and money and resources into creating because they think that's all people want.
Yes, and speaking of that, actually, this is an aside and totally unrelated, but it really pissed me off the other day that I was reading about Naughty Dog talking about bringing back Jack and Daxter, and
Why does
basically
that?
they
I
said
thought you've wanted that for a long time now.
no. The reason why it pissed me off is because in 2014 they were working on, or 2013 or something. They were working on maybe doing a Jack sequel, but they basically said that's when they made The Last of Us, and they basically said, "Oh yeah, we're not like interested in that cartoon stuff anymore." And
And,
like, what's the
now
most
they're
popular game?
backpedaling.
Well, I don't know if they're backpedaling now, but I'm just saying, like, I just read that they said that back then, and it just pissed me off because I'm like, look at what the most first of all, look at what the most popular game in the world is Fortnite, which is a game that does not have a realistic graphic style by any stretch of the imagination, and
Exactly.
it's like, because the thing is these games have an appeal, and nobody wants to see fucking like how many fucking like different polygons you can put in someone's fucking facial hair.
Yeah,
like
yeah. See, that's
like
my
honestly,
big
for all
point.
intents and purposes, why I don't think anybody really cares about that other than the few people who want to like always be on the absolute cutting edge of everything. And that's like, that might be like a really expensive, that might be actually some of the people who are paying a shit ton on microtransactions, just really rich
Could
people who
be
have a lot of money to blow on this shit. But like,
right.
and that might be their core demographic. But again, it's an kind of like an ever shrinking demographic
Yeah,
in a
but
lot of
that's
ways.
my big point about Fortnite is Fortnite's
Fortnite
success.
is like an everyman type game because anyone can play Fortnite.
Right.
You don't have to buy it. You don't have to pay for microtransactions. You don't need like crazy hardware to run it. You don't need like anything but your console and your TV to make it look good.
Right, and that's my big point is the fact that Fortnite's success speaks to what the common man, what the average gamer wants, and that's why it's so successful. And it's so funny because, like you said, it doesn't have a realistic graphics system. It doesn't have, it didn't have like a huge, development budget. It doesn't have like
It's a
all this
new
crazy.
thing.
Yeah,
It was a total
it's a
fluke
new
out of
thing. Yeah,
nowhere. It's a
exactly.
total
And
fluke out of nowhere. Like these are all things that like gaming, like gamers want, but like it's not what gaming companies are doing for the most part. Like I mean, sure,
exactly.
Fortnite has some of the same problems as stuff like FIFA and like Battlefront has, but like in a lot of ways it's doing those things a lot more right than these games that were supposedly supposed to be. Like Battlefront 2 is a love letter to fans. That's what they said before they released it.
Nothing could be further from the truth, quite
I
honestly.
I know.
But yeah, that's why it's so interesting to me is just that is because it delivered an enjoyability and practicality to
It's
fans that they've been wanting for a while now that no one's been giving them, and that's why it's so
it's actually
successful.
that feeds into my next point too, which is enjoyability. Like uh Fortnite is fun to play, and it does not require you to be like it does like a lot of games nowadays have this progression system that requires you to play like 30 hours a week like it's a fucking job in order to stay competitive at the game. And like
Battlefront 2.
the average gamer does not want to do that. Like yeah,
Yes.
Battlefront 2 with its massive grind, or like Destiny with how much shit Destiny has. Now you have to stay like you always have to buy the next DLC pack to fucking yeah.
To
Or like
continue, yeah, absolutely, or else
yeah,
you're out, and it's like
yeah. What
y-
happened to the days of like Fortnite kind of like it almost like catches the vibe of like a couch co-op game, but it's a massive online multiplayer game. You know what I mean?
yes.
Because that's the problem. Like couch co-op games were so fun because it was just a bunch of random people, a bunch of friends getting together.
And just having
Whereas now,
fun, yeah,
yeah,
and
we're
just
just
having
having
fun, and
fun,
you
and
didn't
that's what
have
you
to
can do in
spend all this
Fortnite. You can
time, yeah.
just have a party of a couple people and have fun, and you can do that in other games. But Fortnite kind of catches that vibe of like open-endedness, and like you're not doing the same thing over. I mean, you are kind of doing the same
I was
thing
gonna
over and
say,
over
yeah,
again.
it's Fortnite's an enigma because it's like technically you are doing the same thing over and over again, but there's so much variance in gameplay that it doesn't necessarily feel
Right.
like you're doing the same thing over and over
Exactly,
again.
and it's like Fortnite is a good example of a game can have a very simple like. There's really nothing complex about Fortnite. Like
That's the big point
you
I
have no
wanted to
button.
make. Yes,
Yeah, you have no button
simplicity.
combos. You just have guns and some items, and you build stuff. And like
Exactly.
the fact of the matter is, like a game that's like extremely easy to play, but when you get down to like the strategy of it is really complex. Like Fortnite, like building strategy in Fortnite is really fucking crazy if you get good at it. But
Yes,
like a
which
game that
neither of
has
us are, but yeah,
the
but
game the
yes.
game that has the depth for the hardcore gamers, but it also has the accessibility to everybody else is like the game that has the most widespread appeal.
And
And
hence why Fortnite is where it is right now. And that's the big thing for me is simplicity. And not to waste too much time or too much more time talking about Battlefront 2, but that was a huge issue with me with Battlefront 2 was how convoluted and complex the level up system was, and it's
yeah,
just so like game developers and companies think that fans want this like needlessly complicated mechanics, and no, we don't. Like maybe there's a couple people that are like, yeah, we do, but the
we want
overwhelming
to really
majority.
delve deep into this customization system. And it's like the first game I played that had like a deep customization system. I was like, yeah, that's cool, but I don't want it on every single game I'm playing, and I don't want every single game I play have to be like it's like because it's like if you want to play like one of these games, you have to like devote like a significant chunk of your week to playing those games if you want to stay like up and up on them.
Right, and that's not what the average gamer wants. That's my
And
point that
Fortnite
I'm
is like
making.
so. The reason why Fortnite does this well is because they release shit like new weapons and they change stuff up and they change points on the map. Even though it's essentially the same map since release, they change stuff on it all the time to the point where like, but it's not stuff that is like, you know, that if you played like when the game first came out and then you didn't play until now, you could jump right back in. Whereas like every other game who does like a progression system like this and then just keeps building the progression system, it's like if you jump like even when I bought the first Destiny, It's like if you
Right.
jump in, it's like if you haven't bought all the DLC and you haven't like been leveling up with everybody along the way, it's like you're essentially fucked. Nobody wants to play with you. You have nowhere to go. You have to do either grind through everything on your else or just go and kick rocks.
Yeah, pretty much. And again, like I said,
Fortnite is very like you can just pick it up and play it even if you've never played it before, no matter how far into the game, no matter how far long the game has been running, no matter how far into it is, you can just pick it up and play it, and that's it. And there's no like extra DLC required. There's no like microtransactions are entirely optional. The game is free, and it's just like it's fun and it's easy to play.
yeah, exactly. That's, this is all basically my point. Like I said, was, that's the overwhelming majority of fans, the common fans, the average people, in my opinion. Like, that's why Fortnite is the most popular game in the world right now and has been for a while, is because, that's what the majority of people want. They don't want, like I said, Battlefront 2 is my best example, because I was all hyped up for Battlefront 2 when I got it, and I was like, this is just so needlessly complicated, and Fortnite is the exact opposite. And people don't want, in my opinion, needlessly complicated. You don't want
And
that.
the party lines would be, or not the party line, but like the company line would be like, well, not every game can be Fortnite. It's the exception to the rule and all this shit. And I'm like, I'm not saying every game should be Fortnite, but I'm saying more games should incorporate these things that Fortnite is incorporating.
In their own way, yeah. Like, obviously, you don't want every game to be like Fortnite. That's not what I'm saying either. But you're right. Yes, you want franchises to try and, do this, take the same mentality that Fortnite took at attacking their game.
Next reason why Fortnite, or why not Fortnite, but next reason why multiplayer gaming sucks nowadays is
For the most
because of
part.
the like I said, lack of couch co-op. Like, what the fuck happened to couch co-op? No big games have it anymore.
Yeah.
Everything, and I know one of the reasons would be like they say, oh yeah, if people can just go to their friend's house to play it, nobody's going to buy it because only like one person in the group will buy it. But that's not true at all. Like
Yeah.
everybody buys their own copy of the
Yeah, and
game
then
for a
it's
good
like
game.
whoever's house you're at is the copy you're running. Yeah, so it's
And
like,
it's but also I guess I get the reason too is because again it's something that costs more, and with these gigantic inflated development budgets that are there anyway, anything that cost anywhere they can cut costs, like corners just get cut anywhere they can possibly do it
except
just
off
to say.
graphics for some reason.
Yeah, because to them that's seen as being like the necessity, because
Yeah.
like it's weird, and it's also like reviewers will like tear them apart if there's anything, if they have like graphical glitches or anything.
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of the trend that we're both on the other side of the fence of, is like everything to these big companies is like, you know, like
It's a
it's
budget thing.
yeah,
It's
but
not
well,
like it.
not only
It's
that,
not
but
like
everything is like a surface, like there's no core value, or there's very little core value to a lot of things people do. Like, it's all flash, it's all surface, on the surface, and then when you get to like the core content of games and stuff, it's like, where is it? You know?
yeah, like look at Battlefront. They're like, oh yeah, we have all these eras, but it's like each era has like 2, 3 maps,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's like
Each era has two or three maps,
and
and
the
there's like
and the
two or three
problem is that
characters,
that's the
and
thing
it's
is
like,
like, and
what?
no, and people will say something like, oh yeah, well Fortnite only has one map, but the fact of the matter is Fortnite's one map can play in almost infinite number of combinations, different ways that the map can play depending on how the storm closes and depending on like where you drop and depending on where everybody else drops. But
Right.
Battlefront, everything plays out exactly the same in every single game.
Yeah,
No
basically.
matter, and the other thing is though, like no matter what map you're on, it plays out the same. Like most maps, the objective sequence is like very similar.
Yeah. Yeah, no, like I said, variance is always a good thing in, in multiplayer gaming, in my opinion, and
And
a
more
lot of
about
games like that, like Battlefront, just didn't have that.
Battlefront, the grinding, like not only the over complexity of the system, but also the grinding, like the fact that they're like you have to put like thousands of hours into the game to get enough shit to get enough currency to buy all the stuff. And then when they
Right.
redesigned the system, they just made it more complicated, or maybe they made it slightly less complicated. But they changed the system, so then you have to like learn a new system. So it's like everybody has already moved on, dude. They don't care about this game anymore.
Yeah, it was more so Battlefront 2, to put my final thoughts on Battlefront 2. It
I
was a
think they
game that was
legitimately would
doomed
have.
from launch, because you had a game that was designed around microtransactions, and then you basically rip out the microtransactions. So it's like, what do you have left? So it was definitely doomed from launch, in my opinion. Then,
I
secondly, like I said,
legitimately feel
everything's
like
overly complicated, convoluted leveling system, and then they keep changing. Like each new update just changes everything again to the point where it gets even more convoluted, more complicated, and less fun. Like the most fun version of Battlefront 2 that we played, I think, was the launch version of it, and that wasn't even that great, and it just kept getting worse and worse. So it's like,
I'm not necessarily sure if it kept getting worse and worse, but it didn't get any better. And
yeah,
here's the other thing: is it's kind of like I feel like they probably would have been better off just keeping the microtransactions in, because at least then, like, everything would have essentially been the same, but everything wouldn't have got fucked up. It would have maintained the player base for longer, and they would have had more income to release content.
yeah, yeah. That's what happens when you decide you're going to do something one way, and then like bail on that idea before it even comes to
The problem
fruition.
is they were like less popular than Donald Trump when they decided to like do that, like that, and that's the thing is they had to like course correct, and they pretty
Well, I was
much
going to say because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but
dug
I
their own
believe the
grave.
reason they even did that in the first place was because their projected sales numbers were so low that they were like, oh, we got to do something fast or we're screwed.
Honestly, they were even more screwed, because the only way, with how deep they dug themselves in their hole, the only way they were going to have any chances if they were able to like keep those microtransactions and milk the people who bought the game. Like I said, the ever decreasing minority of their hardcore fans.
And they didn't even do that, yeah. So,
Yeah, and they didn't even do that because it was basically like it was just such a big shit show. And I heard Disney stepped in and actually made them remove the micro, because the EA was going to just triple down and keep them in, like I
yeah.
said, which is actually probably what, from a business perspective,
Would
and
have been a smarter decision from a
even
business
from
perspective, yeah.
even from like a logic perspective, it was probably, I don't know, for a long term business decision. It would have been better for a short term business decision. Uh,
Right.
but like
Well,
in
that's the
terms of a
point is you
long term
can't
business
you
decision, it might have
can't
entirely like destroyed the Star Wars gaming brand. Not that the Star Wars brand is kind of like shit. In the past year, the Star Wars brand has basically
has
gone
gone
to
to
shit
shit. Yeah.
anyway. So
Yeah,
yeah.
but that's the point is you can't design a game around something and then just take it out at the last minute. Like, so that's why I think, yes, the game would have been a complete ripoff had they kept the microtransactions in, but the fact that they didn't just shot everything to hell and doomed the game from launch. So it's like, but it is what it is. Like, that kind of thing does happen, although I think this particular case was kind of an unprecedented situation, like you said, with Disney actually saying take out the microtransactions at the last minute, and that kind of like, threw everything to hell. But I doubt that the game would have done much better. Like they probably would have made, or they definitely would have made a lot more money off the game had they kept the microtransactions in, and I don't
But
think
in
that,
terms of, I think Disney was probably thinking of it more as like a long term brand type thing, that like this would like
like a
damage the
show of
Star
good
Wars.
faith almost.
Well, they
Yeah.
feel like this shit would damage the Star Wars brand more than the amount of money we're going to lose on this.
Yeah, yeah, but well, I'd say at this point, who's to say whether that's true or not? I guess if and when they ever do come out with another Star Wars game, we'll find out. But I kind of do agree with that. They were probably like, okay, this game is going to be a wash. We're going to take a loss on it. So instead of looking like complete dicks and milking people out of money, we'll just throw that out the window as like a sign of good faith almost to the public and see what happens. So
Be like, yeah, look at us, we listen to the fans. When in reality, that's
we
not
we
true.
built this crappy game around microtransactions, and
We just
then
ripped them out and took like 4 months to do anything else, and when we brought that back in, it sucked anyway.
yep, there it is. Yep. So that's pretty much it for
And
that.
I don't want to grind, and I don't want to grind for hours and hours to fucking unlock shit that like everybody has better quality equipment than me, and I have to grind for
Well, that was
hours
a
and
big
hours and hours
issue
to get up.
with that leveling system on Battlefront 2 is the fact that everything that you like, the unlocks are actually stuff that helps you in the game that affects
Well,
the
that's the other thing. So
gameplay.
like in the first Battlefront, like I don't remember. I know it was easier to like, it took less to unlock the weapons, and you had more weapons available from the start. Like you only unlocked a few weapons, than some were from DLC, right? And
Right.
some you could actually get for free through DLC from doing challenges. But like in Battlefront 2, it's like every weapon but the base starter gun for like each class you have to like grind to get.
Grind or pay to unlock, yeah. So
Yeah,
that was going to be the idea, and then you couldn't even pay for it anymore, which led you to doing nothing but grinding
it
for it. So
just
yeah,
killed the player base.
it was a disaster. But um
one another point I want to bring up is untested games going live because of the fact the short development cycles. So what I'm saying is essentially when games go into beta nowadays, it's already too late for them to correct any major problems. Like the
Mhm.
beta that you get is essentially not the beta; it's basically the main game, and they can change like a couple. They can do like updates and stuff that they would do after launch, but the discs have already been pressed, the game's already ready to go.
Yeah. So
They're
there's
not going
not
to
going to be
change it.
much that changes
It's not.
about it.
Yeah, it's
Absolutely.
not. It's not really a beta anymore. It's kind of just
Betas
like
aren't betas anymore. Yeah,
it's
that's
like
definitely something of interest to note. Absolutely.
it's like a test run of the game.
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, that's no the limited and shortened development cycles. Again, going back to the first point we made was, you know, people get the developers put themselves in a box with this thing basically, and so they're
And,
limited as to what they can do.
and the other thing about Fortnite is like again, a lot of the rules don't apply to them because they were basically a beta from day one. So they were like saying like, okay, this is an unfinished game, buy it if you want, and then people just latched onto it, right?
Yeah,
Whereas like
exactly.
all the other games they're like, oh yeah, our game's totally finished. Yeah, of course it's finished. You should buy it. You have to buy it because our game's the best thing in the world. And then you
I'm
buy it and
sorry,
it's
but
unfinished and
no
it sucks and it's missing all this shit and it has like glitches and exploits and spawn camping and the game's just fucking
I'm
ass.
sorry, but no Star Wars game that doesn't have Obi-Wan as a playable character is not finished and ready for release.
Well, he might be out by now, but I haven't
I
played the
don't think
game in like
anybody
four
cares at this
months.
point, to be honest
Exactly.
with you. Yeah, I
Exactly.
actually that was like a few months ago. I saw that they released Obi-Wan and Grievous, I think, for as DLC, or and
They were
maybe
planning on it.
yeah, Dooku and Anakin. But it's like, who cares at this point? Like, it's too little, too late. And that's the thing is like, again, going back to the point of like you stick these games together because of the shortened development cycle, and then do it. It's like, what do you? It's almost like, what do you expect? At that point, like that you
Yeah,
can't expect
but
anything else.
the other thing is what I was saying. I mentioned this a little earlier, but it's kind of how games are supported nowadays versus how they used to be supported. Where it's like once the game launches, back in the day, it was like, oh, the game launched, time to work on the sequel, right? Now
Yeah,
it's like the game launches,
time
now
to
we
work
got
on the
to
game. Yeah,
yeah, basically, yeah.
the game launched. Time to work on the game.
Yeah, it's like, well, we basically just it's like let's throw our first draft out there and we'll kind of correct it as it goes, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
also, but and that's kind of almost why because is that the microtransactions and DLC stuff is like required is because of that. That's one of the
yeah,
additional reasons.
yep, yeah. That is definitely true. So
Yeah,
what can,
yeah, yeah.
what can you do?
So,
I think
and I
that
also, all right, I mentioned this shit talking about skins instead of maps and like
right.
all the cosmetic stuff instead of good content.
Yep.
But fanboys cream their pants over it for some reason. Like they're
Again,
like,
yeah,
oh my
like
god,
that's
they're like, oh my god, look, Tracer's wearing like pink spandex instead of orange.
yeah, and again, that's just something that I'll never really fully wrap my hand around as someone who I consider myself to be more of like a tried and true like old school gamer. Like I'll never understand why gamers will choose cosmetics over content essentially. Like that
Yeah,
just
it's
doesn't
it's it's
make
literally like
sense.
the personification or like the actual like definition of like style over substance.
Yep.
Like
Yeah.
it's literally it's like not even disputable. It's like you're favoring like just the surface, like what's on the surface over what is actually there, over what the actual like meat and potatoes or what the actual like uh underlying value. You're just taking like you're actually preferring just like the flash over the sizzle over the steak, right?
Yeah, pretty much that's exactly what it is. Yeah, and like I said, I'll never be able to wrap my head around it as far as I can tell. I'll never be able to
Like
wrap
I've
my
seen
head
people
around it.
like friends like post like, holy shit, look at this new set of emotes that's coming out on Overwatch. It's like the greatest thing ever. I'm gonna buy all of them. Like I actually have people on my friends list who post stuff like that,
That's
and I'm like,
funny.
are you like paid by Blizzard to post this? And it almost looks like that. Like, and I'm like, I know you're not, but it's like it seems like you're fucking brainwashed or something.
Yeah, it does feel that way with a lot of stuff, going on like that. It feels like, again, with the old school gamer mentality that we have, it's kind of like you can't
I don't even know
understand how
how
someone can
old
think
school
that.
gamer mentality I have. I'd say we're more like mid school gamer because old school gamer mentality is like
Well,
you
old school
fucking
to us, which is
you
like
mod your
10 years
Atari.
ago.
No, old school mentality is like you mod your Atari game chips and go for the Tetris world record. But we're like
Yeah, no,
mid
we're not in that boat, that's for sure. But yeah,
we're
no,
like
we're
we're mid school to the point where it's like
fair
we
enough.
remember you know
We remember when developers actually cared about giving quality content over just
we
flashy graphics.
we remember when you could see the individual polygons of all the 3D models. Right?
I remember when
Back
the
in, back in
fingers were
Crash
just the
Bandicoot,
fingers were just blocks on the characters.
or the whole hand was just a block. Right?
Yep. Yep.
So, like, yeah, I was thinking about this the other day that I think this may be the first console. It may have started on like sometime last generation, but this is where even if this isn't 100% true, it definitely feels like this might be the first console generation where we actually are the real content of games is actually decreased. Like the average game has less content now than it did the previous generation.
Yeah, I would agree with that because it always felt like an upward progression before now. It always felt like, like the PS1 generation, it felt like okay, the things are
Every new
getting
game had like it was like okay more levels or like more weapons or like
more
more game
content. Yeah,
modes,
that's what it
more
was.
game
And
modes,
then
more
PS2
like
it was like
actual
okay,
content.
more content. PS3, okay, more content. And
Yeah, but
then
like I'm saying, the content was all like more game modes, more weapons, more characters, more like it's stuff that actually was like real, like
back when content
tangible
was content.
content. Yeah, like tangible content, and now it's just like more skins, more emotes, more like cosmetic stuff that you can just look at.
Yep.
Not that doesn't do anything, right?
Yeah, no,
And the other
that's
thing
what
is,
it is. That
and
is
it's
what
kind
it
of all
is.
like a synergistic system of bullshit that works together because it's like they can't release that stuff post development cycle. So that's why the games come out unfinished and they release skins to make up for the lack of content, because they release the content after the development cycle. Everybody would just say the game's unfinished, but then they could say, no, the game's finished as it is.
Yeah.
But we just are doing these additional skins because we love the fans so much. We want to give them the skins they want, right?
Yeah, for the right price, of course, or the wrong
Yeah, and
price,
it's
depending
like
on your
this. It's like
perspective.
this never-ending cycle of like bullshit. That it's kind of like a system that synergistically works together. And obviously, the biggest gaming companies learned or know how to come out at the highest point and make the most money off of it.
Yeah, that is basically. I think that about sums it up. So I don't know if you have any other bullet points, but I think we're
No,
probably about
I
ready to
have
wrap
more.
things up.
We're not
Nope,
done yet.
not
I have
quite.
I have several things left still.
Johnny has
Okay,
several more angry things to say, and you're gonna hear them.
Johnny's gonna rant. We got we
That
got
hasn't
some
happened in quite
like
a while.
what's the deal with remakes? Everything is either a remake or a reboot or a sequel or a re-release
Or a
or a
copy and paste.
remaster or something re. Why?
Don't
Why is it
forget
all
the copy and
re?
paste.
Yeah, in addition to all the copy and pasting, we have a plethora of reboots. Like I don't know if you played it, but the 2016 Ratchet and Clank, although
I
not a
did play that.
multiplayer game,
Oh, you mean the game based on the movie, based on the game?
which was based on the original game,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah, I did play it. I thought it was not too bad actually. I didn't
That's the problem. It was not too bad, but it was also not too good.
basically, yeah.
It was an inferior version of a 15-year-old game.
Sadly, yes.
Yeah.
And which still wasn't terrible, which speaks to the level of quality of the original game, honestly, to me.
Well, the original game was great and it was better. The
Yes.
problem is that that's exactly what is happening. The sequels, the reboots, the remakes are inferior versions of games that are 10, 15, 20 years old
That
that
is
are
a
coming out.
problem. Yes.
Like honestly, like you played WWE 2K16 or I think 17 is the most recent one I played. I don't think I played 18.
Hmm.
And then you go back and play SmackDown Here Comes the Pain. And you are a fucking liar if you're going to tell me that 2K17 is a better game.
If you've had more fun playing it. Yeah.
Or that it was more fun. You're a fucking liar. You might say Oak has more better graphics, which still are actually kind of shitty because they've been recycling the same graphic engine for years. By modern standards, the WWE games have shitty graphics now
Yeah.
for like the majority of the models. I mean, like Triple H still like the really like big guys like Triple H and Orton and Cena, they all look great, but like a lot of like the mid carders and below look like ass. They look like a PS2 model.
Yeah, I was just
But
gonna
like
say, yeah, they don't. The bigger name the wrestler is, the more time they spend in developing their hair follicles.
yeah, but like that's the thing is like and that just speaks to inconsistent quality. But
Right.
yeah, they put more polygons in your hair follicles depending on your how high
How
on the
many
card you
how many
are.
times you've won the world title?
Yeah, but why is Dolph's model so shitty?
I don't
I mean,
know.
he has a couple world titles, but
Yeah.
anyway, what I was saying is like they release inferior remakes, reboots, sequels, or
Yep.
whatever of old games. I mean, sure they might look prettier, like in terms of the polygon count, but even then, like the art styles sometimes, like that's like you go back to the PS2 games, and some of the PS2 models of some of those characters are better than the PS4 models because the art style was better. Whereas now it's just they look like stupid, ugly blobs.
It's funny you
Because
should say all that because that's a grievance that some people have with the Pokemon franchise too. Is that it's kind of like a declining quality, like everything becomes less fun. And I don't know that I necessarily agree with it, but I definitely understand where people are coming from with that because
it's
it's
just like
like
this is like the guise of gaming nowadays is they want to do the least work possible, put the least actual content in the game, but make the game seem like it has the most stuff, and the quality control is just low also.
yeah, that is definitely true. That with all the big name games or most of them anyway, um,
Again,
that's
fanboys
kind of
cream their pants over it. And
yeah, that's kind of the
let me just
trend.
say, like the least of the offenders is the Crash Bandicoot and Sane trilogy because they actually like remade the entire games from the ground up and they're just as good as the originals. So that is like an exception. But like
Yeah.
99% of them are not as good as the originals. They are not remade, or they are not remade from the ground up, or they are not like they are missing features, or they're like they added features to that, right? Like it had more
Yeah.
features, it had everything the old games had and then some,
It was
right?
basically, yeah, I was gonna say basically
That's the
those
way.
the remasters, the Crash Bandicoot remastered trilogy, basically was just a re-release, and everything was basically better, which is kind of what a re-release should be, you know.
Should be, and any re-release, remake, reboot should be the better version of the game. And if it's not, because it's like you had more time to make it, you
Better
possibly,
technology at your disposal to make it as
yeah,
well.
and you also had a template of literally what to do. Like it's like
Yeah,
you get
other
you
than
have
a blank slate, like when they actually built the game in the first place.
and if your game still comes out shit, then like you just suck.
There you go. There you
And
have it.
yeah, I don't know. And yeah, so we talk about Star Wars, we talk about Call of Duty. We don't want to talk about
I
them
think we hit just
too
about
too much.
everything. I think.
Dated graphics engines in the WWE 2K games, and
Yep.
full priced games with fucking
Full price games
I
with
mean,
no
why
content.
why can't they just release a game like, I mean, I know why they don't, but if
Yeah.
they I think they would actually do better if they might do better if they released a WWE game that was like a content, like this is what they should do. Every 2 years release a new game, and then every other year release a content pack that just updates the roster and adds in like some game modes and shit. They could basically, like, the development cost of that would be like half the price maybe of developing a new game. They could keep
Yeah.
the old game, keep all the player base from the old game, and charge like half the price of a new game for that, and they might get double the audience, and it would be cheaper to make. And then the next year they could have a new version that has a shit ton of new features and everything, and that would actually be a good game, right? Why don't they do
Yeah.
that?
Well, I think they do that to an extent actually
Oh,
now.
it's
Like
because
they do have like downloadable like DLC with like new people for the rosters. But
no, that's only for the first. That's like the season pass type shit. That's even worse because it's like a season pass type shit, and you got to pay for it all extra, and it's like more
yeah.
expensive than a full game if you buy
Are you
everything.
just talking about free DLC?
No, I'm not saying free DLC. I'm saying they should just release like a content pack update, like
Yeah.
an expansion pack, like the next year, like that would have all the updates to the current to the roster, and
Well,
it
I
would make
think right. Well, I think the main reason that they don't do that is again feeding back to the original point, which is obviously they're going to make a lot more
more
money
money
if
on
they just
microtransactions. They can make
exactly.
more money if they split that all up into microtransactions,
Yeah, that argument could be made. You know,
then
as we
release.
covered, microtransactions are making a ton of money for the gaming industry. So
Yeah. But like Fortnite being open ended, simple, addictive, free, and having optional microtransactions that don't affect gameplay and that are totally optional again, makes it an exception to the rule and a positive in the gaming community because it's also again an anomaly. It was kind of even though
I
it
was
kind of
gonna say it's
slowed down.
almost like Fortnite being like probably like the only game we've talked about in a positive light throughout this entire podcast. Like
Other than kind
the
of the Crash Bandicoot trilogy.
and kind of Pokemon if you're me anyway.
I'm not sure if we were entirely positive
Yeah,
about that.
but yeah, so that's the it being positive is like the exception to the rule too. So it's like
So yeah, but before we go, I just want to talk about this article from Nag Online, and
okay,
it's
never heard of
essentially
them.
I mean neither, but it's addressing the old man. What I said in the beginning, I
The old
called
man
it
yelling at the cloud.
yeah, I jokingly called it the old man yelling at the cloud fallacy potentially, and it says, "Think gaming sucks now? It hasn't changed. You did." That's the title of the article, and then there's a picture of an angry old guy like squinting his face, and it
That's
says,
funny.
I'm going to read some excerpts from the articles.
Sure.
So to start off, the writer says, I've written a couple of times here about being a grumpy old man who's on the wrong end of the gaming demographic, usually with a healthy dose of cynical bitterness and wistful nostalgia. Haven't
Sounds
we all?
familiar.
Frequently, I've spoken about how games were back in the good old days, stroking my beard and wobbling on my cane as I lower myself shakily into an old armchair. The points I've made before aren't exactly wrong. I still stand by them. But recently, I've been considering that perhaps the biggest change to how I experience gaming hasn't been the games themselves, but it has been me. Well, I can't necessarily disagree with that in a lot of ways, but he did say a couple things. First of all, his points still stand, which I would assume are probably a lot of the points we've made about the declining quality of specifically multiplayer games right here. But
Yeah.
at the same time, it's like as you get older, you're supposed to get wiser, and if you're not, then you're kind of fucked up. So, like,
Fair enough.
obviously I would trust my opinion of me now more than I would have trust my opinion of me 10 or 15 years ago. Just
I would
saying, like
agree.
even
Yeah.
like if I was a random person on the street, like, or for most people, even like my friends, if like I would trust the opinion of a friend now than that version of the person from 10, 15 years ago
Which
in
really
general.
makes sense. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, that's the kind of thing is me, I'm sure that's part of it, to be completely honest about it. Like I'm sure as you get older and you get, like a little more, I guess, cynical about things, and you get a little more critical of things, like you're bound to think about that. So I think that's part of it, but I think there is definitely a significant portion of it that is the fact of the matter is that the quality has just, like, even looking at it objectively, you can tell that just the quality of a lot of stuff in the gaming industry has gone down. But, there are still beacons of light. There are still beacons of hope. There are still some good games out there. There are still some developers who care about providing quality over Flash. And you just have to focus on those, I guess, and hope that more companies catch on to that and, try to do that.
Yeah, so I'm gonna read a couple more excerpts. He says a
Sure.
lot of fun in games today are hidden behind a grind wall of hours and hours of gaming that works to keep you playing towards something or some or other benchmark that will
Sounds like he's
eventually
talking about
unlock.
Battlefront too.
Yeah, when you unlock when you actually wanted to be this benchmark will unlock something you actually wanted to be doing in the first place. How many times have you heard someone say Diablo 3 only really starts at level 60 or League of Legends kind of sucks until you have runes and masteries unlocked? Yeah, games shouldn't be like that is essentially the fucking point.
Well, yeah,
Right?
he's right. That is correct.
Like having
Games.
to skip 10 hours of gameplay. Yeah, like I'm agreeing with him so far. He says that used to be me, one of my favorite games growing up. Uh, hold on. He said this is great if you skip all the vast varsity lectures and spend 10 hours gaming every day with your meals and disposable income taken care of by your parents, essentially. And he said that used
Yeah.
to be me. One of my favorite games was Diablo 2, and my friends and I would spend hours every day grinding. Okay, so he's essentially talking about how, like, back in the day, he used to grind the shit out of these games. Like, but okay, Diablo 2, this is an example of a game that was like an RP. Okay, so I can see why in RPGs and stuff like that, the grinding is kind of like necessary and even like likable, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about multiplayer games that
Right.
have that type of shit, which was not really a thing back in the day, right?
Right.
Like I understand that RPGs have a like, and it's kind of like you have to like actively buy a game in that genre to get that, but nowadays it's just everywhere, right? Back in the day, it was like you
Yeah.
had to actively be looking for that, and at the same
And
time,
if
I
you
really
didn't
don't
want
think
it,
it.
you could
I
just
really
buy
don't.
a game that wasn't like that. But
Yeah, and the
now
thing
you
is,
can't do that.
yeah, really. And then he says things are different now. I no longer want to have work. I no longer want to have to work my way to third base on a video game. I'm looking for fourth. I'm looking for fourth base on the first date. I can understand that. When you only have an hour or two for gaming a day, you want that hour to be meaningful. Hell, if I wanted to have an hour of entertainment stretched into 10, I'd just watch the Hobbit trilogy. Okay, I wouldn't watch it either way.
Yeah, probably not, but I definitely get that.
If I'm honest with myself, for a game to grab my attention today, it needs to have one of two things: strategic complexity or an engrossing story. Disposable action is just something I've outgrown, like Pokemon or FHM.
There it
Okay,
is.
so I would. What the hell is FHM?
I don't know. I just heard Pokemon and I heard him taking a jab at Pokemon and turned
Okay,
off.
so I would actually say that is entirely false for how I feel about games nowadays. I feel like the opposite is true. I need a game that like is immediately like a popcorn game that's fun just to play, like Fortnite, or I need a game that is like I can just like pick it up and play in multiple sittings and finish the story like Uncharted, right? Like
Yeah,
that's the type of game I need nowadays. I don't need a game that requires like hours and hours and hours of grinding or like
to get anywhere. Yeah,
or strategic complexity that takes forever to fucking learn. I just want a game that's fun in the now, or a game that's going to give me an experience over time, right?
fair
I don't
enough.
want to. I don't want a game that's, and I think you would. I think most people would probably agree with that. I'm not this
The
guy. I
average
wasn't
the
really.
average man would agree, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So he's the next thing he says is game development to a large extent has left me behind. I've. If I'm after complex strategy and deep storylines, I'm not going to find it in Call of Duty or Destiny. But here's the thing: if he's really behind once complex strategy and deep storylines, the games are still out there.
Yeah,
He
you
just
just
has
have
to
to
fucking
find
look
them.
for them. The problem
Yeah,
with multiplayer games is that like multiplayer games, they um, go to the lowest common denominator, and they need to have a wide appeal to be successful. And
hmm
like if people aren't playing the multiplayer games, you're not going to be able to have a good. It's like a very community type thing, right? So you kind of have to at least somewhat go with the market, unless you're willing to get a super niche game and get your group of people playing Borderlands or something like that. That's all
yeah.
well and good, but like multiplayer games are kind of different from single player games in that respect.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Yeah. As much as gaming statistics constantly show higher age brackets as well as being well represented in gaming, that's not where studios are pitching their games. Blockbusters like Call of Duty tend to make their big bucks out of people somewhere sitting between the age of 12 and 25. I mean, that may or may not be true. I haven't seen the statistics. There is hope, however, in the indie market. Finally, he brings it up. Some of my standout gaming experiences from the last few years have been games like Firewatch. Yeah, just play that shit. As much as Doom doesn't excite me like it used to, if Half-Life 3 was announced tomorrow, I'd probably have to invest in adult diapers. Yeah, but I can almost guarantee you, if Half-Life 3 was announced tomorrow, it would be fucking filled with microtransactions. Valve probably wouldn't even be the developer, and it would be like they turned it into like an like a fucking they turn it into like a Fortnite clone or something,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah. I know that definitely could happen. I mean,
it would be guaranteed inferior to the previous iterations. Because all
yeah,
the whole budget would go toward like how
graphics.
quick it would go toward how quick can we get this game out, how good can we make the graphics, and like how much can we like play off of the nostalgia emotion of these people to just get them to buy the game and play it long enough that they can't return it.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So,
Yeah. He says I'm too lazy to do. Well, hold on. First, he says if I buy a game, it's knowing that I'm spending money that I could be saving. Yeah, I agree with that. Using on the house, paying off debts, etc. If as an adult, every cent you spend has opportunity cost. Okay, yeah, I understand that. But even as a kid, I understood that.
sure,
Running out of money when I'm 28 means finding a nice, sturdy piece of cardboard to write a funny joke on. So, okay,
sure.
because I guess he writes jokes for a living, or he writes bad articles. The sum
Yeah, no, I
total,
think it's the latter, but
the sum total of how I plan to make gaming about me again in this is this column you're reading right now. I don't think many people are reading it.
I was just gonna say, yeah. So,
Yeah,
um,
nag.com. I'm not really talking about it because this week because I want to change it. I just think it's an interesting topic for discussion. I can agree with that. Uh,
fair enough. Yep,
yeah,
and that was the whole point of
he doesn't
this,
really have much else to say. I don't
right?
like I don't even have the time or even the inclination to fight for video. So basically, it all boils down to, I mean, things have changed, and he even admitted that. Like,
Sure.
I don't. I think it's undeniable that the landscape in gaming has changed, and whether that's a positive or a negative is kind of up to your perspective. But I think the majority of people would agree that, like, having incomplete games that are rehashes with lack of innovation, the same shit over and over again, rampant microtransactions, and just a huge like concentration in like the same things over and over again in terms of the market is not a good thing. I think
Yeah, I mean,
most
especially
people
when
would
you
agree
put it
that.
that way, that definitely is, it's pretty obvious that that's a bad thing. But
I'd say most people would agree that that's not a positive way for multiplayer gaming to be going. Like,
nope.
I mean, in terms of, yeah, I mean, like you would think like back in the day, if I were to like say what would you think gaming would look like in 10, 15 year multiplayer gaming, you probably say like, oh man, there's gonna be like all these people probably like, oh man, it's gonna be like crazy VR and you're gonna be like in a simulation or like everything. There's gonna be like so many options when really it's just like it's gotten worse.
I was just gonna say, yeah, that's yeah. You if you would have asked me 10 years ago what I thought gaming was going to be 10 years from now, I definitely would not have said it's gonna be like, okay, we just released this game, time to work on it. You know,
Yeah, and
like
also like it's just like I said, it's like you would think like, oh, immediately think innovation when it's like, if
yeah.
anything, things have gotten just progressively less innovative.
Yeah, I also definitely wouldn't have said, "Oh, you just bought this game for $60. Now, time to spend even more money on it so that you can actually play it. You know,
Yeah,
like that you can play
I
it with any
remember
success."
when horse armor was a thing.
I
If
don't even
anybody
know
gets
what
this
that
far into
was.
the podcast, they're gonna know about horse armor.
Yeah, I don't even know what it is.
Like when Oblivion came out in 2008, everyone made a big fucking deal that like there was DLC where you had to like you didn't have to, but you could buy armor for your horse, and they made a huge shit like, oh my god, they're charging us for horse armor. I can't believe this. And like nowadays that would be like,
They're charging you for
yeah,
freaking taunts nowadays because that's what an
I
emote is. It's
know,
just a
I know,
taunt, and they're charging you
I
for taunts. So it's like,
I
what
know.
the hell?
They charge you for fucking everything. Like if they don't
Yeah,
have to put it in the main game, like especially things that are like cosmetic.
like taunts.
But like horse armor was like nowadays they'd be like, horse armor, what an amateur.
Yeah, yeah, pretty
That's
much.
that's what
Um,
EA would be like, of course.
But I think that's a good place to leave it. So, because we have been talking for longer than I thought we would be. But again, this was a pretty interesting topic to talk about, I think. I think that's going to do it for us. But I would like to thank Johnny Reps from Crash Love Gaming for joining me here on the first episode of the Captain's Table. Expect more episodes to come. If you guys did enjoy this video, please feel free to leave a like, a comment, a subscription, share the video, any of that good stuff. Also, check out Crash Love Gaming, those guys over there, if they ever decide to post a video again.
Subscribe to my fitness Instagram for great fitness tips about fitness.
Yeah, sure, if you want. So yeah, so that is
You two
pretty
can have
much.
you two could have unimpressive 15.5 inch guns like this.
There you go. If any of you guys want that, check that out. So, thank you guys for watching, and we will see you next time.